Hello, Vincent Carroll speaking. This is tutorial number 33, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. First of all, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome has undergone a name change over the last couple of weeks, and now officially it is to be known as Polyendocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome. I think most of us will probably still refer to it as Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome for quite some while going into the future. But anyway, just to mark that, the name has changed. What's it from an acupuncture point of view? Well, first of all, from a Western medical point of view, the person is likely to present maybe with fertility issues. Perhaps there will be some facial hair. Perhaps the person will have an expanded lower abdomen. Perhaps there will be menstrual irregularities. That's all very common with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Very often the person might be that little bit tired as well. And about 10% of the population, of the female population, of reproductive age, have polycystic ovarian disease. And it's said in something like 70% of those cases it remains undiagnosed. From a Western medical point of view, often there is raised androgen to a greater or lesser extent, and that accounts for many of the symptoms. From an acupuncture medical point of view, you're dealing with a number of things. You're dealing with damp. You're dealing with the presence of damp in the lower jaw. You're dealing with the stagnation of qi, and you're probably also dealing with kidney yang qi deficiency. Not always, but usually those factors come into play. So let's dissect them down. Let's have a look at them. First of all, if qi doesn't move, but qi moves blood and qi moves body fluid. Body fluid isn't moving, and body fluid, otherwise known as damp, can accumulate in what is in effect a cul-de-sac, the pelvic area, the lower jaw. So that's one reason why fluid accumulates, and it can accumulate as lumps and bumps. In other words, ovarian masses, simply because the qi then isn't moving. Because when the qi doesn't move, the fluid itself doesn't move. So you have a stagnation of qi leading to a stagnation of fluid, meaning damp. But where does the damp come from? Well, we all have a certain amount of extracellular fluid, otherwise known as damp. But here you have an excess of it, and that means the spleen must have failed at some level or other. So you look for other evidence of damp, and you probably find it, maybe sock marks, but certainly the tiredness that often is associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome would be part of that as well, part of the spleen qi deficiency. And when spleen qi becomes deficient, the next port of call on the slippery slope downwards, of course, is spleen yang qi deficient, as the spleen is being reinvaded by damp. And after that, of course, you're down to kidney yang qi deficient. So very many people with polycystic ovarian syndrome are down to kidney yang qi deficiency. So there's often a sluggishness, a lack of motivation, a tiredness, and perhaps a lack of enthusiasm about trying to get the problem sorted from a Western medical point of view, for starters. And therefore that probably accounts for the fact that something like 70% of people who've got polycystic ovarian syndrome are unaware of it, because they haven't been motivated to do something about their symptoms in many cases. So polycystic ovarian disease, therefore we must, or ovarian syndrome, we must look at three things. We must look at the spleen being deficient, the kidney yang being deficient, the liver qi not moving, and the accumulation of damp clogging and coming into various specific masses, usually associated with the ovary. But there should be other evidence of damp as well. So look at the tongue. See, are there teeth marks, for example, as the tongue is expanded with the retention of damp and the retention of extracellular fluid. There should be teeth marks on the side of the tongues. Have a look out for that. Also, there should be expansion of the abdomen, and that expansion is due to the liver being stagnant in the abdomen. The liver isn't moving. Very often when the liver doesn't move, one gets heat for the very simple reason it becomes like a pressure cooker effect. But for polycystic ovarian syndrome, for the most part, there is no heat. It tends to be a cold, damp, and an expansion of the abdomen. The abdomen doesn't expand to the same extent that it often expands, say, with massive liver qi stagnation that sometimes can accompany, say, endometrial disease that I've spoken about in a previous video. This is milder, but still there can be significant expansion. There often is not pain because there isn't heat present. It's more a cold damp. So the tongue will show signs of cold rather than heat. Again, there's exceptions to every rule, because when you have damp, it's only a matter of time before damp can be invaded by heat. But in polycystic ovarian disease, very often that hasn't actually happened. So a person has an expanded abdomen that feels uncomfortable, that feels heavy, that is expansive. And it affects menstruation, affects energy, affects enthusiasm for life, and that is down at kidney level. So what are the treatments? What do you do? Well, first of all, you get rid of damp. That's the single most important thing you do with spleen 9 bilaterally. You move chi so that the damp at least moves on and it doesn't just clog up and stay there in what, as I often said, is a cul-de-sac, which is the pelvic area. So liver 3, gallbladder 34 to move it along. You tonify as much as you can. Tonify spleen 3, tonify the kidney at kidney 3 as well, source point of the kidney. All these points need to be tonified. Maybe bring energy up with do 20. Maybe do 20 maybe 3 times. In other words, do 20 needle in the center of the skull where do 20 is, and pop in two other needles at 45 degrees around it, or even 4 other needles, making up 5 needles in do 20, angled in at 45 degrees to elevate the yang qi. Would I needle locally? I often do, and I would needle towards the pallus of the fetus, which is 3 sung lateral from Ren 3, following the curvature of the body. Again, it's often far more than 3 sung, because if the abdomen's expanded, you have to take into account local anatomy. But when you hit it, you'll know it, because there will be a chi response, and that's important, but not to the same extent as if there's heat there. And there'll be no heat coming out, because generally it's not a hot condition. It's a condition very often associated with cold. So you have a clogging up of extracellular fluid or damp, forming lumps associated with the ovaries, and that has become quite stagnant. There's also probably fluid level as well at the pelvic area also, and that is going to reinvade the spleen, where damp reinvades the spleen. So we have this vicious cycle in action. So you need to be quite persistent when it comes to polycystic ovarian syndrome. You need to see it very much as damp, and to eliminate damp as much and as often as possible. Would I put heat in? Because I did say it's a kidney yang qi deficiency. My worry in doing that is that you could add that eventually all damp becomes heat, and you don't want heat in the damp, which is far more distressing than cold in the damp. So yes, by all means, you could put a little bit of mox on the Ming men, which is do 4, 1.5 sung lateral as well, urinary bladder 23, 3 sung lateral to do 4 is urinary bladder 52. So roll your moxa over and back across that, but very briefly. I would only do 1 or 2 sessions and no more, just to give the person a sense of well-being, an elevation in mood and an elevation in motivation, so that they continue coming to you, so that you can actually do something practical and useful with their polycystic ovarian syndrome. So that's it really. Thanks very much.